The first morning, Dravenk almost killed her. Not out of malice. Not out of pride. Simply because he forgot, for one careless heartbeat, that she was made of something that broke. The Krothian warrior stood at the center of the Vareth Soul training floor, his obsidian scales catching the harsh light of the orbital station's artificial sun. 6 feet and 9 inches of armored biology, muscle layered over muscle, a species that had never once, in 4,000 years of recorded history, lost a war it chose to fight. He looked at the small human female standing across from him and felt something dangerously close to guilt. She had dirt on her boots already. She had been early. "You are Cadet Mara Ellison," Dravenk said. It was not a question. "From Earth." "Deathworld designation confirmed," she said, and grinned at him like it was a compliment. "Sector 7 recruitment. They told me you were the best trainer in the Krothian fleet." She tilted her head, studying his size the way one studies a geological feature. Impressive, yes, but also categorized, measured, understood. "I've been waiting 6 months for this assignment." Dravenk had been assigned human trainees before. 2, in total. The first lasted 11 days before requesting reassignment. The second had cried during the Vethrak endurance run and told Dravenk, in a trembling voice, that she needed a doctor, not a warrior. He had been gentle with them. By Krothian standards. Which was to say he had not shouted, had not thrown anything, and had allowed rest periods of up to 4 standard minutes. He had expected more of the same. What he had not expected was day 1. He put her through the Zuralka warm-up sequence, standard light conditioning for new recruits, designed to identify physical baselines. 90 minutes of joint rotation, weighted bodyweight movement, and cardiovascular stress calibrated for Krothian physiology. At the 60-minute mark, he called a stop to assess her condition. Mara Ellison was breathing hard. Her face had gone an interesting shade of deep red. Sweat soaked through her gray training uniform in wide, dark patches. She asked him when they were starting. Dravenk stared at her for a long moment. That was the session. "Oh." She wiped her face with the back of her hand. "Can we go again?" He did not know what to do with that. So he said yes. By the end of the first week, he had stopped calling it a warm-up. Day 30. The Kethrail was a Krothian combat technique passed down through 6 generations of military lineage. It was built around the assumption that the practitioner's bones would not shatter under full-force impact, a reasonable assumption when designing movements for a species whose skeletal density was 4 times that of most humanoids. It was not, by any conventional calculus, a technique meant for humans. Mara learned the footwork in 2 days. "Your skeleton is going to fracture," Dravenk told her, and he meant it as a warning, not a threat. "My skeleton has fractured before," she said pleasantly. "I heal fast. Most humans do, with the right supplements." "Can you show me the elbow sequence again?" He showed her the elbow sequence again. She got it on the 3rd try. Dravenk had trained 64 Krothian warriors over his career. The fastest to learn the Kethrail elbow sequence had taken 8 days. He went back to his quarters that evening and sat in the dark for a while, rearranging things he thought he understood. Day 67. They sparred for the first time. Dravenk used 40% effort, a level he reserved for newly promoted junior officers who needed humbling without hospitalization. He was being generous. He was being kind. He threw the first strike. She wasn't there when it landed. He didn't understand it immediately. He turned, recalibrated, and she was 2 feet to his left and slightly behind him, having moved in a direction that violated the most basic assumptions of the exchange. He threw the second strike. She was gone again, not dodging in any pattern he recognized, not retreating, just elsewhere, slipping out of the geometry of his attack like water through a closing fist. On the 4th exchange, she hit him. It wasn't hard. Couldn't be, she massed perhaps a third of what he did, and her small fist against his ribcage registered as roughly the impact of a mid-weight training ball. But she had gotten through, and Dravenk stood very still for a moment processing this information, and Mara Ellison stood 3 feet away with her hands still raised, reading his expression carefully, as if checking whether she had committed a cultural violation. "Is that?" she started. "Again," Dravenk said. They went for 2 hours. At the end, he was breathing hard. Day 112. He started asking her questions. Not about technique. About Earth. About the specific, grinding, granular dailiness of growing up on a planet that was, by any galactic standard, genuinely trying to kill everything that lived on it. She talked about storms that could peel bark off trees. About animals that had developed strategies for hunting in packs, then for hunting hunters, then for hunting things that hunted those hunters. About learning to sleep light. About the childhood game she described once, offhandedly, chasing each other through forest terrain in the dark, where the consequence for losing was real enough to make your body remember. "You grew up training," Dravenk said slowly. Mara frowned a little. "We grew up surviving. The training part was secondary." He thought about the Varith Soul children on his home world, drilling in climate-controlled chambers. He thought about the careful, graduated curriculum, the safety margins, the equipment calibrated to reduce injury risk. He thought about what it had produced: excellent, disciplined warriors. He thought about Mara Ellison, who had asked to go again on the first day. "Your species," he said, choosing his words with unusual care, "does not learn combat. Your species learns that the universe is hostile and then builds itself accordingly." She blinked. "That's a very generous way to put it." "It is not generous," Dravenk said. "It is accurate." Day 180. The final assessment was witnessed by 3 Krothian fleet commanders and 1 bemused human liaison officer who had been brought in as a formality, to verify the candidate's species, mostly. To confirm that the paperwork said what they thought it said. Mara Ellison completed the Vethrak endurance sequence in 41 minutes, 4 minutes under the Krothian fleet record. She completed the full Keth rail combat form, unmodified, without a fracture. She sparred 3 Krothian trainees in sequence without a rest period and won 2 of the 3 exchanges before the third managed to bring her down in the kind of close-contact grapple where mass was simply a mathematical advantage that no amount of skill fully overcomes. She got up. The liaison officer wrote something in his notes. One of the fleet commanders, an old veteran with a scar running the length of his snout, said nothing for a long time. Then he looked at Dravenk. 6 months, the commander said. It wasn't really a question. 6 months, Dravenk confirmed. The commander looked back at Mara, who was rolling her shoulder experimentally and cataloging, with the calm efficiency that Dravenk now recognized as her default mode, the exact nature of every ache in her body. Not wincing. Inventorying. And before she arrived here, the commander said, she had no formal combat training. Correct. Then what did she have? Dravenk considered this for a moment. He thought about everything he had learned, in 180 days, about what it meant to come from a planet that sharpened you against its own teeth before you were old enough to know what sharpening meant. She had Earth, he said simply. The commander was quiet for another long moment. Schedule the next intake, he said at last. I want more of them. Mara Ellison looked up from her shoulder, caught Dravenk's eye, and gave him the same grin she had given him on the very first morning, bright, unbothered, already asking, what's next? Dravenk, who had spent 40 years being the most dangerous thing in any room he walked into, looked at her and felt something shift permanently in how he understood the word dangerous. He had trained 65 warriors now. She was the only one who had ever made him feel like the student.